Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Music Buds podcast. This is episode number 54, and my name is Henry. This week, I'm honored to be joined by composer Osei Essed, known partly for his recent work on the new Netflix documentary Amend, The Fight for America, as well as many other great projects. It is so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I really appreciate it.
Much the same. Yeah. Thank you for having me here today.
Yeah, anytime. Well, how's life for you these days?
Life is as busy as it can be. We had now a 1-year-old in the midst of a pandemic while scoring multiple projects at once, and got a puppy as well on top of that, just to make sure things were really busy. And we have our 8-year-old that we're homeschooling. So just doing it all.
Yeah, seems so. Well, I guess just kind of kicking things off, I wanted to ask you, how was it that you got started in music? Was that something that you had always wanted to do?
It's something I've been doing since I was a kid, really. I started out wanting to initially, I guess, make movies. And then my family wasn't into that. And I had a cousin who was playing guitar, and I started playing guitar and singing and playing in bands and all of that kind of thing. And when I tried college a few times and couldn't figure out what I really needed to be doing, I remembered that the only thing that I was doing all the time was music. So that's what I did.
Yeah. Well, how did composing come about for you?
A happy accident. While I was in school, I met a great human being by the name of Dan Romer. He and I played in bands together for a long time, and he, when asked to do a project that he thought would work well with stuff that I was doing, he just finished Beasts of the Southern Wild, and coming off of that, someone asked him to do an Americana score. He said, "Look, I'm friends with someone who can do this with us." And so actually he and myself, as well as a third member of that same band, made the score for that small film, which was really a beautiful film called The Last Season.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the first project I did. Keith Maitland asked me not long after actually to do a project together, which was Tower. He and I had been friends for another, decade and some odd years at that point. So that was an old friendship that sort of grew into a working relationship. And I think just really those things compounded. There were a few more that sort of built on top of that. And eventually I was doing it more than I was doing other things. So,
yeah. Well, I did want to make sure to just go ahead and ask you about the new series Amend, The Fight for America, which is on Netflix, and it tackles the 14th Amendment, citizenship, equal rights, so many different things. And it's hosted by Will Smith. And really, when I started watching this series, I felt like in the best way, in about 5 minutes, I was already overwhelmed by the amount of information and style in this show. And how did you get involved with this project?
Adam Weber brought me in. He was working at Doc Group at the time, and he's one of the producers. He brought me into the fold, and I met all the folks over there, and then met the folks over at Overbrook. And eventually, Rock, Paper, Scissors was involved, and we were all sort of jamming. But it was really, Adam and I've known one another for a while, and we were friends, and he was familiar with my work, and so that's
yeah. And with the show, where there's there's animation, there's kind of talking head, narration, almost you can call it, reenactments, photography, footage. How was it that what was the process like of trying to come up with something that was cohesive and it also goes across different time periods as well? I feel like that would have been a really challenging process.
It was. I mean, finding, I think the voices that would become our chorus was all we talked about early on. And we had a rather more limited palette when we first started, but recognized that we'd have to widen a little bit while still maintaining sort of a unified and cohesive voice, especially working with as much source music as we are throughout the series. I mean, you had to find something that like could travel through time as well as bridge, all kinds of pop music, and then all these emotional moments, and at the same time allow for the delivery of information and be interesting. So, I mean, it was not challenging for sure. But we talked through it, the entire team was really open as I found my voice. And, once we'd really stumbled on it, we went through and really talked through every scene. We talked through pretty much every moment more than once in the entire series. And, we got there.
Yeah. And was there, whether it's the subject matter itself or perhaps the filmmaker's approach, was there something specific that really excited you the most or touched you the most, either when you had just first had gotten on it or during the process?
Well, I mean, the whole series is one that pretty much just touches every part of our life. And so, we started the scoring process with the 5th episode, the love episode. And so right at the outset, there was just, that's for me, I mean, even though there are moments that perhaps speak more directly to my life, I mean, that episode is just so emotional and beautiful. And I mean, of course, not to say that, the crux of it doesn't, or rather the meat of the episode doesn't touch my life. I'm in an interracial marriage. We have mixed race kids and all of that. And so it was just really overwhelming from the beginning, it's not something I could separate myself from.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and as they say right at the beginning of the series, it's one that it's an amendment that, it is so vital and so important, and yet so few people bring it up, and as they're explaining it and kind of tracking it through history, it's almost unbelievable the amount of weight that it holds.
Yeah. I mean, it really does. It carries so much. I can't pretend that I knew much about it before I got started. But just working through the series and watching all of it and listening, it's incredible. It is everything. It's essentially what I would imagine all the protections, of the Constitution to be are really right there in that one amendment. Yeah.
And with, episodes kind of tackling different subjects, did your process change, or did sounds change from one to one, or did you kind of find a fairly cohesive linear sound for all of them?
There are definitely some more modern sounds, but I guess I tried to not be able to use modern sounds even when we were, 50 years ago, 50 years, 60 years back, or 150 years back. I think the key was really figuring out how we were going to tell the story across time and have it feel as organic as possible, because I think the organic element is really, I think for me, what carried the cohesiveness.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what's great about and your music plays into this is like it feels so accessible. There's little bits of humor, and the style itself is very, I guess, for lack of a better word, welcoming. Like it kind of it brings you into that story. And I feel like this is something that, I would have want to have seen when I was in school or something. It just has that immediate, like, I'm interested in this topic, at least for me, it did.
Well, right on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, that was the goal.
Yeah. Well, and we can go back to it. I did want to ask you about Tower, which is about the 1966 University of Texas shooting. And I wanted to make sure to tell you that documentary, I knew nothing about it going in when I saw it years ago. And it has stuck with me so much. It's one that I tell everyone to watch. And I just wanted to tell you how big of an impact it had on me.
Thank you. I yeah, for me, Keith is an incredible filmmaker. It was really amazing working with him on that. That project, all the animation made everything feel so visceral, really just right there on top of you. And yeah, I was really happy to be working on that project.
Yeah, and was the animation, because I think, considering the subject matter going in, some people might think, oh wait, it's animated, that seems strange, but it's done so well. Was it interesting to kind of create the music for that in that way? Whereas for example, with this with Amend, it's much more real footage.
Yeah, for Tower, I mean, I think Keith's approach is generally somewhat modular, but also he's not afraid to abstract. And so I think it would have been abstracted either way, but the animation definitely allowed us to take some liberties that we might otherwise not have an opportunity to.
And all, like, do you find that because it seems like, and something I really respect, you seem to tackle such, not necessarily heavy, but projects with a lot of weight to them. Does that kind of mentality help you creatively, or is that just oftentimes the people you end up working with are doing those projects?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think probably one begets the other. You start telling a certain kind of story, and working with filmmakers who are taking some risks, and hopefully other folks want to work with you who also want to take some risks and want to tell stories that are important. I mean, for any story really that we get to tell, the hope is that it's going to be one that like translates a really deep human connection and makes us, feel like the world is a little bit closer to us than it could otherwise be.
Yeah. And speaking on that, were there any like that when you were growing up that had that effect on you, whether it be, movies, TV shows, anything that stuck out to you?
Wow. That's it's funny trying to go back in memory. I've probably watched, tens of thousands of hours of television and movies. I mean, I grew up watching cowboy movies. I really enjoyed that a lot. And I loved the martial arts flicks on Saturdays. When I was a kid, that really, I came here in 82 as a first generation immigrant from Suriname, which was like this tiny Dutch speaking country. So I came here and I wanted to learn the language really quickly. And my family, fortunately, worked with me to help make that happen. But another thing I did was watch tons and tons and tons of television. I watched everything from Crazy Like a Fox, which I think maybe was like a Dick Van Dyke show or something. I think he was in it. I watched tons of Angela Lansbury and, whatever it was, Murder, She Wrote. I watched a ridiculous amount of television and movies when I was a kid. So I'm sure that there were connections there. And I think there are certain things I liked more than others and responded to more than others, but I was rather indiscriminate. And I still often am indiscriminate in what I consume in terms of media. Sure.
And one thing that immediately kind of struck me about your style, and I think it works so well in this kind of film and series, is that it is quite minimalist in its approach, because you wouldn't want to watch something like this and have the music being overbearing and distracting you from the subject matter, because there already is so much weight and drama there, and so your music kind of threads you along almost. It kind of ties the pieces together. Is it difficult withholding yourself, I guess, not being too out there, or did it just make sense for the project that you were a part of?
Generally, when I'm working, I think it really is about telling a story and finding a way to tell a story. And in documentary, there's just so much information often that you don't have. If you were going to go maximalist, or if you were going to go really big, you'd be getting in the way of the storytelling. And the point is to tell the story and to get it home and to make sure that we're all understanding, if not the same thing, close to the same thing and living in the same world. So I try not to get in the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another project that really struck me was the documentary Jim, the James Foley story, which is about this war correspondent. And again, it's such another just intense, heavy topic. How did you get, well, I guess you've discussed that already a little bit, but I'm really fascinated by war correspondents. So this kind of thing really compelled me, not to mention, just who he is as a person, but what was it like being a part of that project?
I mean, that was a very crazy project. Actually, we scored Jim in under 3 weeks. Myself and Dan Romer and Saul Simon McWilliams, we lived in the same studio and just worked ridiculous hours. I think something like 18-hour days were not really out of the question. So that was a very quick project, I think. But nonetheless, it was one that was all consuming because we were working these long hours and, just pretty much talking Jim and living Jim.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you find whether it's a project that you have a lot of time to work on or for example, like with a short amount of time that like writer's block can kind of hit you? And do you have ways of getting out of it?
No, I don't really have writer's block. I mean, maybe in my life that'll be something that happens, but most of the time there's always some kind of thing happening in the back of my head or in the front of my head, sonically. Yeah. So it's anything. If anything, it's really more trying to grab onto it and bring it into this space where we all exist.
Yeah. And with whether it's in any of these projects we've talked about, is the filmmaker and that relationship pretty important to you, or are you able to work with either whether it's by yourself or with the other composers and still kind of have a good clear idea, or is that relationship with the filmmaker pretty essential to your work?
I love it best when I'm working closely with the people who are probably have the deepest understanding of the project. So I think there's no substitute for teamwork, and really in the truest sense. Yeah.
With this past year, as you had described, been crazy for so many different reasons. Is music something that you, when you're watching movies, TV shows, whatever it may be, is that something that you notice immediately because you are a composer, or are you able to kind of just focus on what it is?
It depends what I'm watching. If the media is good enough, like if the story is compelling enough, then I can put it away. As if the music is not intrusive. But even so, there's going to be some moment where there's going to be something that either I'm like, oh yeah, or I'm going to say, I don't know. So I can't ever wholly put it away, I suppose. But I think in the best of times, or in the best circumstances, it sort of becomes part of the whole.
Yeah, no, I feel that because I feel like with being the editor of my podcast, I feel like when I'm listening to other podcasts, I can't help but notice the little blips and pieces, or little cuts, and at times I can, as you were saying, kind of, get that out of my head, but it's kind of the curse of the creator, I guess.
Yeah, you can't help let it go. You can't let it go. But also, it's like you're learning constantly. If you're even like paying half attention to something, some distracted sort of attention, you're still there's something that you're pulling out of it.
Yeah. That's a good point. Well, it's so nice chatting with you, and of course we could go on and on about these projects. But is there anything perhaps coming up that you'd like to have known, or anything else I haven't mentioned about these projects that you've like to have said?
About the projects that we've talked about, I mean, again, I love all of those projects, and I'm glad we talked about them. coming up, I guess at the end of May, I'm not sure when folks will hear this one, is another Netflix series called High on the Hog, which is produced by One Story Up, and Roger Ross Williams. I think he directed 1 or 2 episodes, and it's about the African foodways in the diaspora, in particular in the U.S. Is where it starts out, and so that had some really wonderful, opportunities for musical storytelling alongside beautiful food.
First of all, congratulations about that. That project. So yeah, that's I can't wait to see that.
Yeah.
Osei, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk. I would love to get you back on some other time for chat about some other films.
I'd be back anytime.
Sweet.
Anytime. Yeah.
All right, everybody. I think that is about it for the show this week. Please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe on your way out. Thank you so much. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Music Buds. Check out themusicbuds.com. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and we'll see you next time.